Look at this crowd. All right. So I am Daphne Brooks. I teach at Yale in African American Studies, American Studies, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, and Music. It's such a true pleasure and an honor to be here with you all today and to have the opportunity to introduce and to be in conversation with two of our deeply admired, stratospherically influential, phenomenally gifted Windham-Campbell Prize recipients here with us today. And as the song goes, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Hanif, Abdurraqib, and Christina Sharpe have each, in their respective, profoundly expansive, stirringly original, breathtakingly intimate, riveting, rigorous, and exquisitely realized bodies of work, conjured, invoked, borne witness to, and repeatedly called into being forms of gathering that have yielded more life, inviting us to hover in the euphoric freestyle conviviality of the Soul Train line, as does Hanif in his symphonic Little Devil in America, or guiding us to regard the radical ethics of beholdenness and the intramural emerging out of a shared choral proclamation of love for, gratitude for, need for, passion for literature that is not a luxury, as Audrey reminds us, but is in fact an acutely potent form of survival, as does Christina in her magisterial ordinary notes. How lucky am I to sit around with these two mammoth thinkers in praise of Black performance, as the subtitle of A Little Devil in America would have it. So before we begin in earnest, I'm going to say just a few more things about our remarkable distinguished guests, with the understanding that there's time enough, but none to spare, to cite Christina, citing and noting the great Charles Chestnut in his epic 1901 Jeremiad of a novel, The Marrow of Tradition. Hanif Abdurraqib is one of the most influential cultural critics of his generation. He's the author of 3 critically acclaimed books of nonfiction and 5 poetry collections, known and celebrated for his deft and cogent lyricism, his wide and roving analytic vision, and the indelible emotional grammar of his poetry and prose. Hanif Abdurraqib has written books that so many of us dig like an old soul record. Among them, his works of poetry, 2016's The Crown Ain't Worth Much, and 2019's A Fortune for Your Disaster, and the essay collections, 2017's They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, 2019's Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest, 2021's Little Devil in America in praise of Black performance, and There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension, released in March of 2024. The recipient of an Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction, the Gordon Byrne Prize, and a MacArthur Fellowship, among other honors. Abdurraqib is also the host of a weekly podcast called Object of Sound with Sonos Radio. Christina Sharpe is one of the most influential scholars of her generation. She's the author of 3 field-defining books of nonfiction, Ordinary Notes, In the Wake on Blackness and Being from 2016, and Monstrous Intimacies, Making Post-Slavery Subjects from 2010. Ordinary Notes, of course, is from 2023, all of which have contributed to a revolution in critical thinking and meditations on the complexities of Black being in the 21st century. And the scale of Christina Sharpe's critical imagination has been nothing short of transformative, galvanizing public intellectual conversations in our ongoing reckoning with the inextricable relationship between US and global political and social life and the catastrophe of Black death. Brave and formidable at every turn, Professor Sharpe's work gifts us with a new lexicon, the wake, the ship, the hold, the weather, to address primordial crises, and her revelatory Ordinary Notes extends the focus of her study in the wake with riveting formalistic invention and conceptual innovation, fusing archival work, cultural criticism, memoir, photography, in a series of 248 numbered notes that reflect on the ordinary, extraordinary matter of Black life, unquote. She's the recipient of many awards and accolades, among them Ordinary Notes was a finalist for the National Book Award in Nonfiction and the National Book Critics Circle Award in Nonfiction, and it was the winner of the 2023 Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction. So hello to you both.
Hello.
And yes, give it up for you know, what a thing it is to bring the two of you together today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to be here with you.
Oh, stop it now. Okay, when we spoke in advance of this event a couple weeks ago, almost immediately the first topic that emerged as a shared focus of our attention was the matter of grief in relation to the creative process. And each of you have written in a variety of ways and with such great nuance and such great candor and acute clarity and astonishingly moving creativity about and with and alongside of and in response to and also beyond the condition of grief as both quotidian catastrophe and world-altering crisis, as both intimate undoing and structural devastation. And one thinks of the ways that say, in the wake and they can't kill us until they kill us, each give us these new lexicons and new frameworks of narrative and critical recognition for this generation of readers to articulate the nature of our grief in many, many registers. And so I thought we could maybe start out our conversation by first focusing on grief in relation to the creative process as a way into a larger discussion about grief in relation to Black musical performance and Black culture, and the ways in which, as writers, we're so often wrestling with and conversing with grief, living inside of performances in ways that enable us to extrapolate these new knowledges from these events. But if we could maybe start with how you each approach thinking about grief in relation to the creative process. I know this beloved audience would very much appreciate it.
Again, thank you. And it's really a pleasure and honor to be here with both of you. And thank you all so much for coming. We were scared at first. There were like 2 people in here. And we thought it's really hard to bring people in on a beautiful day like today. I'll start by talking about, maybe I'll start by talking about In the Wake.
Yes, please.
When I was writing In the Wake, it was in the midst of a set of personal, devastating losses, and also in the midst of global losses, global Black deaths and uprisings and repressions. And so I really thought that as somebody who sort of attends to and accumulates and tries to account for and hold these things together, that I needed to begin with the losses that were in my own life, actually on the page, not just orienting my writing, but to be kind of transparent and write them into the book themselves. And so I thought that that then was a kind of way of elaborating the shared trajectory, burden, and also the possibilities of grief. And I recently heard, Hanif, a very short clip on the thing that I'll still call Twitter, in which you were talking about grief also being a thing that allows you to keep company with a person, and how grief changes over time and you change with it. And I'll say one more thing before I pass it over, and that's I was recently, this maybe April or May, at the Bocas Literary Festival in Trinidad, and a conversation between Elizabeth Walcott and Edwidge Danticat, and somebody in the audience asked her something about the hard work that she does about writing through grief, like Brother, I'm Dying. And she said this really beautiful thing which brought home to me the grief as a kind of tarrying with and a continuing relationship, when she said, every day that I got to write that book, I got to spend time again with my father and my uncle. And I looked forward to being on the page. And I thought, yes, what a beautiful way to talk about grief, not just as tremendous loss, as a recognition of tremendous loss, but as an ongoing relationship that also is textured and changes over time, but that we carry with us.
I have to, of course, share my gratitude. Daphne, I believe you know how I feel about your work. I feel like every time we talk, I show you your book that stays on my desk at all times. And Christina, what an honor to finally get to meet. And I feel like my work has been chasing after yours for as long as I've known your work exists. So it's such a joy. I think one of the most interesting pop records of all time is Fleetwood Mac's Tusk.
Yes, go on, please, because I have so many questions.
Largely,
I love that song.
I don't know if people know that record, but it's this hyper paranoid, Tusk, whereas Rumors was clean and polished and pop drama at its height. Tusk is really fractured. It sounds like 3 albums in one, and it sounds like 3 albums that are fighting against each other in one, and it's hyper paranoid, and really, particularly the Lindsey Buckingham bits, are kind of frightening. But it's because if people don't know about the making of Rumors and what happened during the making of Rumors, one, you should read They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. But in case you don't want to read my books, which is also fine, Mick Fleetwood, essentially, while Fleetwood Mac was going through these internal fractures in the group, divorces and breakups and horrors, Mick Fleetwood locked them in a studio and painted the windows black so that they wouldn't know what time of day it was, so that they wouldn't feel a desire to escape a place. This meant that, yes, they did set out on the mission of making a great pop album out of their misery, but it also destroyed them internally. If we are to, for example, black out the windows of our grief or black out the windows of our anguish and not commune with those we've lost or what we are leaving behind, that will drive us to the kind of madness that really shows up sonically on an album like Tusk, which I love, but I think most Fleetwood Mac fans who heard Tusk after Rumors thought, what the fuck happened? Because they weren't thinking that what happened was actually an internal thing. It wasn't them operating against structures of pop music. It was actually a devastation that they did not allow themselves to recover from, and because they did not allow themselves to recover from it, they saw it everywhere. Second thing I'll say is, real quick, in A Little Devil in America, I wrote about Ellen Armstrong, who was the first Black woman magician to headline her own show. This happened, this is history, but it happened almost by accident. She was a secondary act in her father's show, John Hartford Armstrong, and then he fell ill, and the family needed money, and so she took on the family business. She wasn't really equipped for this, but she did it anyway. She knew a couple tricks. One trick she knew was the trick where she would pull coins from behind the ears of someone and then give them the coin, drop it in a bucket that they could retrieve at the end of the show. I love the story of Ellen Armstrong because she performed to Black people who had nothing. She would perform in barns and abandoned churches to Black people who had nothing. And she would perform miracles because the main trick, yes, pulling a coin behind the ear is aesthetically fascinating, but the main trick is saying, you did not come here with something and now you have something. The story of Ellen Armstrong barely exists anywhere, and I found it and decided it was important to wrestle that from the depths of where it had been, because I think if I'm talking about one major grief I have, there's no better setting for this than this. We are in a place that is filled with respectfully, obviously, but like old objects. You live a life and sometimes your death transforms into objects that are behind glass that people cannot touch. Some would say if you're lucky, I would say if you're unlucky, because your actual life does not get rendered well. And I feel like so much of my work is trying to say, I refuse to let your life become an object. And in doing so, I hope selfishly that I am informing people how to love me after I am gone.
I mean, what I'm hearing from the both of you is thinking about the miraculous, thinking about transferences, thinking about aliveness, to cite our wonderful colleague Kevin Quashie, and kind of the unique role as stewards. I've heard you, Hanif, talk about being a steward of grief, but to be a steward in one's writing of those who are beloved to us, those who we are mediating our relationships with and continuing our relationships with through the creative process and through the written process. And that's a really, that's a thing of beauty, which you of course write about, Christina, right? We've also, the three of us have experienced the loss of one or both parents, and the ways that astronomically volatile kind of undoing has informed the creative process. I'm interested in whether you all want to share anything about that as a kind of ongoing grief that structures just I don't know, I find each of you have writing styles that are so immediate and urgent and built on layers upon layers of care, and I'm just wondering if there are these circuits of connection to that specific kind of grief, loss of a parent.
I mean, I certainly see it in your work. And the kind of impending loss, the sort of knowledge of loss that's coming. But certainly, I think both in the wake and ordinary notes, most definitely. And there are objects that appear in ordinary notes that my mother made or was in the process of making. Like there's a dress that my mother sewed for me when I was 6 years old. It's a purple gingham dress with tulips on the pockets. And there's also at the very end, there's a cast. So when I was 6 years old, I broke my right wrist. And my mother was like, no, you're not going to have your little friends sign this cast. I want it to be a beautiful object. So I was not allowed to have anybody sign it except my siblings and my mother. But I still have this cast. I mean, I've had it for over 50 years. And so when I encountered those, I knew that I had that, but I'd forgotten about the hearts and the straight pins. And so when I encountered them again, it was as if I was encountering them for the first time. And I think I was committed in Ordinary Notes to really thinking with and through a set of objects that I had and a set of photographs that I had of my mother and her mother, who I never met because all of my grandparents died before I was born. And that's both informed by grief, and I didn't name it as this, but it's also informed by the continuing pleasure of the company and the ways in which I learned from my mother, and it took me a while to understand this, that her attention to beauty was not in any way frivolous. It was a deep praxis for how to live life in the midst of ongoing violence, with an attention to beauty, with an attention to what you could make in a space and how your life could be transformed by it, even if it didn't last once you stepped out the door or when certain people stepped in through the door, right? So.
One thing I really love about Ordinary Notes that has really altered my approach to writing about specifically my mother is how well you honor your mother's childhood or youth, which I think it's so hard for me to fathom my mother as a person before our lives intersected. And reading Ordinary Notes, I was like, damn, this is like a really thoughtful way to honor someone's full life even when it didn't involve us. And to even honor your mother's parents, I don't know, there's something, even having never met them, to honor them in that way was really impressive to me and changed the way I thought about things. My mother died when I was 13. And I like to think that, my mother wrote. She was a writer, but she worked 2 jobs. She worked for the state, and then she worked at a JCPenney call center in Columbus, Ohio. And she would come home and work on a book, a fiction book, a novel, on a very old typewriter. The old kind of old typewriters that were so, every button was loud, it sounded like a grenade going on, every button would shake the house. And I remember once I was grounded. I was in trouble, as I often was as a young kid. Maybe I was 11 years old, and I wasn't supposed to leave my room. It was a weekend, it was Saturday, I wasn't supposed to leave my room. And it was just me and my mother in the house. Our house was very old and kind of compact because we grew up poor. And so if you opened up the window, my mother was on the 3rd floor, I was right below her on the 2nd floor. If you opened up the window, you could hear everything happening above you. And my mother, I could hear her typing. And so I very quietly crept up the steps. The house was so old and creaky that you could not walk up the steps. So if you wanted to sneak, you had to kind of crawl, right? Because putting your full body weight upon a step would give you away. And I remember I sat outside of my mother's bedroom door. Her back was to me and she was typing on a typewriter. And I just watched her work for maybe 30 minutes. At some point she had to know I was there because parents are not fools, despite the fact that we may think they are as we're young. And I got to sit over her shoulder and watch her do something that she loved, even though she didn't have a set outcome for it. She loved it because it was not demanding her to be someone who was a slightly more diminished version of her in that moment.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
My mother also wrote, and some of my mother's writing appears both in the Wake, in the footnotes, and in Ordinary Notes, but not her creative writing. But my mother wrote letters to the editor. And she wrote many letters to the editor, and I have a few of them that are handwritten that I've not done anything with. And then I found some in the archives of the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Suburban and Wayne Times. And so I published a couple of them. But she wrote letters over the entire course of her life. If she saw something on the news or she saw something on a TV show, my mother would sit down and write a letter and send it off, and then like make carbon copies of it. She would make, she would write it in her quick writing, and then she would write it in her very neat writing, and then she might type it.
Yeah.
Right? She also had one of those typewriters, but she also wrote haiku, and I have some of it.
It's like, coming from writing parents, my mother finished her book before she passed, but never. It sits in a closet now. It's like in a closet in my father's house in a room. And I tend to think that a part of the legacy of my writing, much of my writing life, I feel like I've talked about this a lot, is deeply intentional. I didn't go to school for this shit. Like I didn't, Like I studied marketing and was bad at college, But I think much of my writing life, the fortune I have of being a writer is saying that I get to live alongside my mother in our shared work. This feels like shared labor.
Yes.
And I imagine, if I am lucky, that my mother is, every time I am writing, doing the thing that makes me feel less diminished than I feel in the world. My mother is returning the favor and hovering over my shoulder as I once hovered over hers, which means that every book is our book and not just my book. And so I think that's a motivating factor.
That is gorgeous.
Can I say one more little
please,
thing?
Please.
Yeah, neither of my parents went to college, but my mother was like, a grammarian. She taught me how to read when I was 3.
Yeah.
When I was in college, she would read my papers and correct them for grammar. And so I also feel that, that it's a kind of joint endeavor.
Yeah,
and that I wouldn't have a love of words if not for my mother.
Yes.
We work alongside our dead, like we really do.
Yes.
It has. For me, that's a requirement. It's a requirement to understand that I'm working alongside the dead, and I don't mean that in just like an ancestral sense. Like, sure, I like to believe that I'm working alongside Morrison, who I love deeply.
Yes.
But I'm also working alongside my guy Tyler. Like who's just like a crusty punk from the early 2000s. We are still, we labor alongside our dead, and if we're lucky, that makes the labor less painful.
We work and collaborate in the round. And my parents were teachers, not writers, but there is something that I've learned from the both of you about how, my understanding of them deepened through the ways that I could write about music and the music that they loved and that we shared with one another, right? So there's this kind of way that the writing process, again, as you both have shared so beautifully, can extend that kind of intimacy and deepen it and open it up from a variety of different angles. Speaking of writing, and I know we want to get to music, but we did talk a little bit about grief, for lack of a better formulation, but grief memoirs that have stayed with us. And you mentioned Edwidge Danticat's Brother in Dying a moment ago, Christina, but I'm wondering if there are other literary works that you want to maybe put into the room right now that help us to think about the creative process of grief and how it's worked out through narrative space.
This isn't a memoir. I talked about this. This was the book I picked for like the Lit Hub podcast we had to do, but I love The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. I read that one. Much like Christina, my mother placed a heavy import on reading when I was young, and we were poor and at first didn't have a library in our neighborhood, so I just read what was in the house. It was like the books we got at the crib are the books you got to read, because that's what we got. So it was like a lot of black women, Windham-Campbell, so I read Your Blues Ain't Like Mine when I was very young, and then I read Women of Brewster Place when I was very young. And I adore that book still. I adore the metaphor of the wall and how it reflects outward to say, look at the harm we can inflict upon each other when we don't focus on our enemy. Look at the way that grief flows into our communities when we turn away from the actual enemy that is hovering over us. And the way that book ends and the way that I feel like people don't remember the little miniseries. Does anyone remember the Women of Brewster Place miniseries?
Oh,
like
sure.
Oprah,
Oprah produced it.
Yeah, Oprah produced that joint. Oprah produced it and was like, I'm going to be in it too.
Yeah, of course.
She might not have gotten that role. Respectfully, she might not have been in that shit otherwise. But that scene, the whole vision at the end of, the imagery at the end of Women of Brewster Place where that whole community decides, what if we just hit this wall?
Like break down the wall.
What if we just find something and hit this wall?
Yeah.
I think that is a real manifestation of what it is to ask ourselves what is possible on the other side of this machinery that harms us, that causes us to turn to our beloveds and see an enemy? What if we just hit the wall and see what happens?
I mean, maybe every book is about grief. I mean, because, I could think about, books that I've been obsessed with, like Corregidora, or Beloved, or, A Map to the Door of No Return, or
Sula.
Oh, yeah.
Girl,
circles and
girl.
circles and circles of grief, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's also something about the tone and the rhythm of a text, that it may not be its subject, but you can feel it, and therefore you also feel it working on you, and it's an invitation to do that work yourself.
I also, I mean, I know we're segueing into the music, but I will say, like, I'm such a better auditory translator of grief. Like, I love Otis Redding because, I mean, and I write about this in, there's always this here about how Otis Redding, even when he's singing a love song, sounds a little sad, or he sounds like he is predicting. He sings a love song like he can see the ending, of the, his cover of My Girl, where he sounds just like tentative and devastated when that song is written as a celebration of what is, and he is mourning what is because he knows the potential for what will come. I love a singer who Jeff Buckley always sounded like a little sad, I think even Mahalia Jackson often sounded like she was moving with a real sadness. And I think my ear is tuned to speakers and singers who are translating a type of mourning.
Yes. And I'll say one more thing about that too is I think it's a book called Love Enough. It's a novel called Love Enough by Dion Brand. And I read that book, and there's a sentence in it that was like a gift, and I think it's Sydney says to June, "You're a collector of sadness."
Yeah. And
I thought, yeah, I'm a collector of sadness. I have a name for this now. But what do you do with that collecting? How do you not just sit in it as a kind of oppression, but what do you do with it?
Yes.
How do you transform it?
As a collector of sadness is such a one. I love that book. I hope not to embarrass Dion. I love that book. And gosh, we are both collectors of sadness. I think there's lots of reasons I don't like the film or book High Fidelity, which we don't have to get into.
Or that TV show.
People.
There's some things about the TV show that are very important.
Yeah.
They begin and end with Divine Joy Randolph.
Absolutely. That's it. That's kind of it. Yeah. People are like, I get it. People are like, man, I love that we just mapped the black woman onto this. It's like, yeah, but the actual structural issues with it's still bad.
Right.
But of the many reasons I don't like High Fidelity, the central question that drives it, which is the which came first, the music or the misery, that's not a conundrum. There's an easy answer. You know what I mean? It's like the misery. It's the misery. Yes. You know what I mean? That's it. That's why that movie, the guy at the center of it was a philosophical moron. But outside of that, respectfully, I hope no one likes that movie a whole lot.
So many of them, it's really like a theme in our modern world. We're trying to expel the moron. I think this is a good pivot to live a little bit with some music. We know we are short on time, but we're hoping we can play some clips. And we have wonderful tech led by Anthony and others. Give it up for the tech team trying to help us out. Okay, yes. Let's go ahead and play the first clip, which is going to be, Christina, do you want to say anything about this clip first, or should we?
Well, I'll just say it's Nina Simone. It is Nina Simone, right?
Well, it was.
Oh, no, it's Alice Smith.
It was Alice,
okay,
but we can't go to Nina.
No. Okay. I just got it out of order. It's Alice Smith, and I have, in my acknowledgments to Ordinary Notes, I did not know Alice Smith, but I thank her for the soundtrack for Ordinary Notes, because as I said earlier today, I'm obsessive, and I listen to Mystery probably 3, 4, 5 times a day the entire time I was writing this book. And then her what's it called? Tiny Desk Performance, which is fantastic.
Sure.
Incredible.
I listened to it over and over and over again, to the great annoyance to some, I'm sure. But this, what she does in this, I mean, I don't remember the exact words, but I wrote about another Alice Smith video for the show Grief and Grievance. And what she does, the way she extends a note, so I quote Kaguro Masharia, who talks about You know, there's a specific word for a kind of cry, and it's keening. I think, yeah, you know, Alice Smith kind of keens, but it's filled with so much longing and desire, and also something else. I mean, I'm going to badly quote Fred Moten, who talks about, you know, blackness anarranges every sound, and it's proof that the object does resist. And I think all of that and more is in Alice Smith's voice. She does something that I don't think anybody else does, the way she extends a note and something kind of breaks. But it's beautiful, it's riveting, it sends chills up my spine, and it's just, I think, incandescent. And it says something about that kind of joy, sorrow. It's in excess of those ledgers that mark us as catastrophe and the bearers of catastrophe. It's in excess of that, and it's quite beautiful. So here's Alice.
I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. You better stop the things you do. I ain't lying. I ain't lying. You know I can't stay. You're running around. You meditated. Can't stand it. 'Cause you're putting me down. I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Mine. I love you, 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 I love you in and out, and I care. You don't want me. I'm yours right now. Yours right now. Ooh,
You can lower it a little.
I put a spell on you.
I'm going to bring down the volume, but keep
But
playing
you can let
it.
keep playing.
Thank you.
I don't know what else to say except, you know, I can't sing, but I sing with this.
I saw Alice Smith perform at the Tribute for Nina at Symphony Space a month after Nina died in 2003. That ended up being the Friday before my father died. And there's something about being in the break with her that's always stayed with me. It's a very different register that I'm hearing what she's singing in there than the Alice Smith that I'm used to. It's exquisite.
It's definitely a different register, but also she can kind of make all the throws. You know what I mean? Like
Truly.
she's one of those singers.
Do you want to share another, Christina, since they're in the queue?
Yeah,
or
sure,
we
yeah,
can
sure.
go to
No, share it.
Nina?
I'm gonna forego my clips and just play one song because I'm looking at the time. I know people are pushing, but definitely play the Nina. Play it.
Play a very little bit of Nina.
Yeah,
I could forego
yeah.
it. And, you know, again, it's Nina Simone. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. Was I doing this when you were a student at Tufts, Morgan? So I've been doing it. So Morgan Freeman was a former student of mine when I taught at Tufts.
come on.
And so I've been doing this for a long time. But I started almost every class. It doesn't matter what the class is. I start almost every class with Nina Simone, but particularly a class that I often teach called Imagining Slavery and Freedom, because of where she takes us to this song. You know, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I already know how it feels to be free. And it's just this fulsome, everything performance. It's part of the Live at Montreux in 1976. You can just play a tiny bit of it. I don't want to keep all of the time. But go home and watch it all if you haven't seen it. Also, like, if I knew how it would feel to be free, everybody would be free. So if black women are free, everybody's free. Sorry. But you can keep watching.
How can we stop this?
I know.
You can't stop
Time,
Nina.
though.
She's unstoppable. Okay, all right. We're going to lower the sound on this, and if we can go any direction you want to head in, you have this incredible sequence of clips.
Yeah, the clips would take me too long to get into, so I'm going to play one song. Is that okay? The clips like follow this course about, I'll borrow something from, I was going to do a thing about Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and then the Kate Bush and Maxwell versions of this woman's work, but that would take far longer than the time we have, so if you want to talk about that, maybe later, I don't know. It would take a long time if we talked about it in person, but I want to talk about repetition and the formlessness of language in gospel music. And I'm going to play a clip from something. I'm going to play like a minute and a half of a song, if that's okay. When I was working on, there's a part, and there's always this here at the very end, where I, through the repetition of the word gang, I transform the word into something that would be seen as nefarious to something that is seen as beloved. Because when I was growing up in my neighborhood, the word gang was a language of affection. And I was thinking about this in terms of, there are some who would say if you repeat a word enough times, it loses its meaning. Like if I were to say the word sandwich 50 times in a row, it would lose its meaning. But that's not actually true, I think. The hard definition is still affixed to the word loses its form. And if a word loses its form through repetition, you can actually attach it to, you can build your own new form around it. This is why I think there are only so many gospel songs that are embedded in the brain, right? And yet they have vast impacts on people. I love Aretha's Amazing Grace, for the documentary, right? Because we see the effectiveness is what I call an extension of the choir. The Southern California Community Choir is the choir on stage, but everyone, like Clara Ward in the front row is also a part of the choir, and Mick Jagger clapping on the 1 and 3 is a part of the choir, unfortunately. And people who are like walking by on the street who are catching wind of the gospel from the outside become a part of the choir. But what does that mean then if we are to constrict the sound of the gospel or constrict the actual emotional, physical movements of those singing the gospel, which brings us to Parchman Prison. So there's a long history, as some might know, of quote, I don't like the term field recordings. It just bothers me for a lot of reasons, but mostly because the people doing them were white and the people doing the singing were black. But for lack of a better term, let's call them field recordings here. There's a long history of field recordings of imprisoned black folks singing gospel or singing work songs. Recently, maybe 2 years ago, Parchman Prison, there's an album called Parchman Prison Prayer that came out where someone went to Parchman and recorded Sunday service, right? I was interested in this, so I wanted to go. I wanted to go see the Sunday service. So I went to Parchman and I sat in on a Sunday service and sat in watching the kind of recordings, see how they were happening. And I was struck by two things. I was struck by how so many of the songs were the kind of gospel songs that were about going elsewhere. about being in one place and seeking another place. And how many of the songs were steeped in repetitions where instead of chorus, like a lot of the songs they would sing had choruses and they would extract the chorus and just repeat, or they would extract the verse, I'm sorry. These songs would have verses, they would extract the verse and just sing the chorus to a level of infinity. And what that was doing to decode a message that was embedded in, it seemed very much in line with the tradition of black singers, say, passing songs along the Underground Railroad, or black enslaved folks singing songs through these coded languages. And I want to play, there's a gospel song most notably by William McDowell called I Give Myself Away. I give myself away so you can use me. And that song has extensive chorus, extensive verse breaks, and extensive whatnot, etc. And what you're going to hear is the Parchment Prison version, which is just a repetition of the two lines of the chorus. And as I play it, I really want people to consider what is happening and think about the men who are singing it and where they are singing it from. If you don't know about Parchment Prison, you should research it. It is, of course, we know every prison is a chain of horrors, but Parchment is, I think, specifically bad. Think about who is singing it, where they're singing it from, what it means for people who are imprisoned and essentially performing slave labor for the state of Mississippi to sing about giving themselves away so that they can be used. So I'm going to play that song. I hope the speaker's loud enough. We'll see. I'm going to play it out.
I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. I give myself away. Give myself away.
Sorry, that always makes me a very emotional person. And so I think it's important for us to think about repetition and formlessness and how that can be utilized to speak in a language that our captors will never understand.
I know that we want to hold a space for people asking questions. I think I want to add one more song to the list that we're compiling, because the both of you have done so much work to galvanize our spirits around gathering, around the communal, and in the wake of loss. So if I could have our team move forward to the very last clip. And I think we'll maybe start playing it low. You're gonna have to keep going. Keep going. I know we can't, I would do that, I would talk about that, I would talk about that too. We're not gonna do that. We are gonna do this, so if you could start playing it and put it very low, because there's a bit of talking first. And I did
So we just got one more song.
write down some thoughts to be with the both of you today. You know, when my father passed 21 years
Alex asked me
ago,
today why I picked this song.
I
How
just
Deep Is Your
now
Love.
realized, literally
I
today,
was in search
surprisingly,
of all my heroes.
that there was no
Stevie
music
always
in my
did a
world
cover on
that
his
day.
record.
There was no
D'Angelo
music
always
at
did a
all.
cover.
It was a long journey from Princeton to the San Francisco Bay Area Peninsula to arrive at my family's house. I did not see my father's body until many days later. And there was no
Trying to pick
music
cover
that
songs,
day.
and I couldn't, none of it was working. that people
But I
were telling
sat
me.
with my
So I
mother
just
for
looked up at,
days,
like,
and
the top
Christina,
20
you write
songs
about
of all
this as
time.
well in Ordinary Notes. I sat with my
Let's
mother
believe if
for
a
days
song
last
touched
year
that many
before
people
her
at one time,
passing.
it can't again.
And I
saw how
found
deep is your love
recourse
on
in
it. I was like,
music in some kind of a musical
I always
narrative
heard it
that
the way I
became
played it, you know.
a playlist that was put on a loop in our room with her, and it was sent out to friends. I sent it out to friends in kind, encircled me.
So we're gonna
They
do that
encircled me with an
and end
electric
that as a
circuit
family.
of
Alex
their
has
love.
one
And
of
so
my
it was
favorite
this
voices in the world,
song, an unlikely Bee Gees cover by the everyday working R&B musician P.J. Morton and vocalist Alex Isley, daughter of Ernie Isley, one of the members of the Isley Brothers, holy germinal architects of rock and soul. This is a performance that I initially used quite a bit in my scholarly life as, for instance, a way into urgent and necessary discussions about the white critical establishment's utter lack of intellectual tenderness and regard for black musical genius. And in my classrooms, I've invoked it similarly. And I'm really interested in, Christina, in how you play Nina at the beginning of classes, right? But to kind of call forth some kind of tenderness in the classroom, right? Lessons about tenderness, which are much more audible in this version of the song than the Bee Gees' original track, which almost comes across ironically as kind of sinister, a desperate and manipulative plea masked as a serenade from one lover to another to show the receipts of affection, right? Gorgeously rendered duet, though. It shifts the emphasis of the song to this kind of Sharpian, if I may, beholdenness, the all-encompassing way in which we can be for and with one another intimately and wholly through an ethics of care. So listen beyond lyrics, the lyrics of the chorus, to the sanctuary that Morton and Isley are building with one another, the braiding together of two voices in pursuit of a deeper understanding about the monumental worth of those who are our beloveds. So sitting at my mother's bedside with this song in my ears, I found the sonic accompaniment to this long moment of everything around us falling away, the purity of the line of connection between us. We belong to you and me. That's a testimony that's echoed by the chorus, encircling these two gifted musicians. It's a gesture that was echoed by my friends and colleagues, a ritual of benevolence and generosity that is rooted in the performance. It's as much as I could ever ask for from the music that courses through our lives. And I am so grateful to the both of you for giving us the gift of words to accompany us in our own sense of care for one another and ourselves. I'll give the last words here too before we transition to Q&A to
Feels so good. One more time, y'all.
Morton and Isley in the chorus.
Is your love? How deep is your love? I really mean to learn. 'Cause we're living in a world breaking us down when they all should let us be. We belong.
Feels too good. Just one more time. Say how deep.
Is is your love? How deep is your love? I really mean to love. 'Cause we're living in a world full of breaking us down when they are showing us be. We belong to you and me. Thank y'all so much.
We belong to you and me, y'all.
Alex Isley.
Questions for our extraordinary, exceptional, and absolutely beautiful guests. We have just a little bit of time. Oh, Rich Blint just jumped out.
He did.
He did.
I can project if you need me to. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you all so very much, and please accept, I think, our collective condolences for the shared grief. What I'm really concerned about, and what I wanted, if you could weigh in on, including you, Daphne, is what do we do, number one, and music is one way of doing that, with collective grief. I was with my mom the last 10 days of her life about 7 years ago, and it was the most profound and difficult experience of my life. Forever grateful. I have a twin brother who's at large in the world on the streets of New York City, who's meth addicted, one of the most brilliant person I've ever met in my life. Bipolar, brilliant, loving man, right? And so when I'm asking, you see these people all the time on the street, at large in the world, black people, in the fields, effectively, right? This plantation called America. And I don't yet know how to process that. And I'm wondering, have you discovered language for processing impending grief? Right? The anticipation of a phone call that would destroy you immensely, even though you know you're already destroyed. How do you process the coming grief that's part of our, as black people, collective inheritance? Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Either of you?
I mean, in some way, I think there are two questions, right? I mean, I remember, waiting for those phone calls, and then the phone call eventually coming. And that kind of always anticipatory grief. And then, so I'm going to put that alongside the other, which is about the sort of state that we are supposed to accept, the kind of utter abandonment that we encounter every day on the streets, almost everywhere in the world where we go, everywhere in the world, right? Certainly I encounter it in Toronto, I encounter it in New York, I certainly encounter it here in New Haven. And I don't have an answer for that other than to say, I do not accept it as a given. I do not accept it as necessary to how we live our lives. I can't believe, sometimes I think, I can't believe I'm supposed to go out into the world every day and think it's okay to step over people and to accept that this is how we are supposed to live. The other, I think, it's what you said about your colleagues and friends and family sending you playlists. I mean, we know, we mitigate it by trying to be present to each other. We mitigate it through texts, we mitigate it through song, through cooking for each other, etc. It's probably not a good answer, but, and we mitigate it by trying to make a different kind of world and the collective effort of trying to bring some other set of relations, because I don't even know if it's a world, some other set of relations into being.
I have long divorced myself from the idea of a coming apocalypse. I believe the world has ended and is ending as we sit here. And I don't mean that in like a loose sense. I don't mean like the world is ending for someone in an emotional sense. I mean like materially. There are simultaneous worlds ending at once. This does not push me to despair. I believe that. One thing that everyone in this room shares is that the loan requirement, and sorry, I know it's like a Friday Wait, is it Friday? No, it's Thursday.
Thursday.
Oh, great, I can be depressed. You know what I mean? Like, let's get down into it, you know what I mean? If it was Friday, I'd be like, damn, my bad, you know what I mean? I know y'all might want to go turn up after this, but we all going to the house, you know? So the only requirement of our living is that it's going to end. You're born and the clock begins. Time begins to descend, you don't know when it's going to stop. The clock's going to stop at some point. That happening at the same time, my awareness of that and my awareness of the fact that the world does not require us, and at this point is going to continue its ending without us, and all we can do is accelerate that ending. And so the question then for me, as Christina talked about building a world, we get to ask ourselves, what kind of apocalypse do we want to live through? And who do we want to live through it alongside? And how do we want to care collectively for those who are living through these multiple apocalypses with us? Yes. None of that will prolong the world's ending, I promise you, but it might prolong your ability to fight for whatever comes after, because again, the world might end and we'll still be in this motherfucker, you know what I mean? So it's time to start asking yourself, what kind of apocalypse do you want? Because when infrastructure continues to collapse and you are still here, that's a question that's going to be answered with or without your participation. So you might as well participate in that shit.
Both of you talked so much about collecting today, you know, forms of collecting, cultural works, collecting emotions, collecting memories, and you know, I think about that as equipment for living in the ways that you both are signaling how we try to survive in a different way, and I think that's key. I also appreciate, Christina, you bringing up anticipatory grief, since and I think this might be true for you too, but my parents were much older. I was a very young child in an older family, and it meant that as a child, I always thought my parents were dying already. And so kind of being able to prepare for what was an apocalypse, you know, through the kind of close relationship with cultural forms that could archive their present here-ness with me was a way of preparing for that. And so the scale of what you're talking about, Hanif, speaks to that on a grand level, an urgent level that we might really hold dear to us right now. So thank you.
Hello, hello. Yeah, super grateful. I feel like so inspired. I don't know, new fan, but like I'm gonna go through the back catalogs. You got me. But my question, like as like an artist, like sometimes I struggle with like the whole discipline thing, and like I don't know, you guys are like so prolific. I guess like my question is, how do you keep yourself disciplined? Well, I don't know, to me.
No, I said he's prolific.
Oh my gosh. How do you keep yourself disciplined on days like you don't want to write, you know?
I don't write.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, all right, I ain't writing. That was exactly what I was going to say.
So maybe that's the undisciplined.
For real. Nah, I ain't doing, look, I know, I'm going to be real.
I don't write every day.
Don't write every day, at all. And at this stage of my life, if anything is remotely uncomfortable, I ain't doing it. You know what I mean? If I like twisted my ankle trying to get up the steps a little bit, we would be doing this shit downstairs, you feel me? Like nothing even remotely. I had like a sandwich I didn't like earlier, and I was like, I'm not gonna finish this sandwich. It's just, you know, so I will say though, I love actually former Windham-Campbell winner, Susan Laurie Parks. I love her so much. Like she's a massive inspiration for me. And she says, she has this quote that's, discipline is simply love for your big whole self. Which means that I think for me, it means there are disciplines outside of our artistic discipline that teach us how to be disciplined within our art. And so I am attempting to be disciplined in how I love my people. I'm trying to be a disciplined dog owner, a disciplined sibling, a disciplined romantic partner, a disciplined friend. All of these things, I'm trying to be rigorous and disciplined in my politic. You know, like all of these things create a quilt or web of disciplines that make the art a bit, you know, when I do sit down and write, which truly is not every day, I'm doing it with a clear understanding of my capacity for care. Discipline is just a real short bridge to care, I think. And so to understand and build that depth of capacity makes the turning towards the art easier for me. But certainly, on the days I don't want to write, I just don't write. It ain't happening, brother.
I think we have to wrap, really? One more?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
One more. We're going to combine them.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I see, can we do that? We're just going to combine.
Combine them.
So
Let's
one
do
over
it.
here, and then I see one over there.
All right, I'll make mine quick. So do you mind talking about the joy and rediscovery of the people that you research and curate, the notes and found notes and artifacts and objects?
Beautiful. Okay, so we've got a question about joy. And Babette.
Hey, Babette.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us. With the deaths of Tito Jackson, Frankie Beverly, I've been talking on the phone with my mom, and thankfully she saw Frankie Beverly live like a month ago, otherwise I don't think she'd be okay.
At Essence?
At San Jose Jazz Festival. Wow. But basically I'm just thinking about those musicians' deaths that kind of stick with you for the rest of your life. And so for all three of you, I'm wondering, who is that artist that you will mourn for the rest of your life?
Christina, I feel like you would have a great answer for the first question.
Yes.
Yes. Joy, yeah.
Yeah. The question was, can I talk about it? It was a complicated joy because at first I was just startled into tears because I opened up. It was in like a baby wipe thing, and I was like, "What is in here?" And then I opened it up, and I was like, "Oh my God, I completely forgot about these things." But then the pleasure of getting to sit with them and think about how, as my mother was dying, she was making these ornaments, and they were hearts. So they were, symbols of love. And she made Christmas ornaments all the time and gave them to us. So that's one thing. And then just, I'd been looking at these photographs of my mother and grandmother over the course of decades and thinking, one day I'm going to write about these. And the pleasure of sitting with them and trying to, the pleasure of attention. And that pleasure and joy of attention is not only to things that are pleasurable, but there's something about the work of attention that I think, even when it's painful, is deeply, in the end, satisfying in some way.
Gosh, yeah.
And then the second question, maybe Nina.
Yep. I'll try to.
You have a lot to go.
I have a lot, but I'll try to narrow it down. When Joe Strummer died, I wore like a leather jacket all through summer that had like a Clash patch on it. Joe Strummer's death really bothered me, but Nina, Alice Coltrane. I'm always heartbroken when folks in singing groups die who are not, like when members of LaBelle started dying, who aren't Patty, the folks who I loved who were in the background sometimes. Aretha. I mean, truly, the big answer for me is Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston's death was devastating for me because she was the first singer I ever heard my mother singing along to. And so therefore she was the first singer I had a kind of path to understanding. So Whitney is big. When Stevie goes, if Stevie goes before I go.
No, don't even.
No.
That's anticipatory grief.
Yeah, which to be clear, we should,
Don't speak it.
No.
Because I was going to read a note about Stevie when my mother played Stevie for me when I was a kid. Right?
Yeah.
Sunshine of my
I'm not
life.
prepared for that one.
No. Don't even speak it.
For me, I wrote a book about Jeff Buckley's death, which happened, he drowned the night I finished my dissertation.
No way, really?
And Farrah Griffin and Sadia Hartman were picking me up to go to a John Coltrane tribute concert. I could get into a long story, but I grieved for months. But, obviously Prince, and getting the news about Prince dying, we could all stay where we were. I was in the car on my way to NYU, and Tavi Nyong'o called me, and it was like I was out of body where I denied it happened to him, right? I denied it. And then NPR called me next for commentary, and I started screaming at them, saying, I need proof. But the thing that came out of me, just to kind of, thank you, Babette, for this beautiful question. The thing that came out of me was a kind of grieving for an entire generation. I said, he was the voice of the post-civil rights freedom struggle. And the NPR correspondent was like, I don't know what you mean by that. And I was like, let me tell you the story of our childhood, you know? So, I mean, the embodiment of what these figures mean to us, it's why we keep writing.
Can I ask you a Jeff Buckley question?
Absolutely.
Have you heard, I'm sure you have, like you are like a Jeff Buckley scholar. You've heard the like Grace Around the World shit, where he's like the version of Lover, You Should Have Come Over in Chicago, 1994, I think it is. That's
yeah.
Do you have like a favorite version of that song? I feel like because there are so many different his shit is like, the live shit is all over the place, but that version specifically to me, I've never heard anything that sounds like that.
No, that's a luminous one. There's one from Australia, and I can't, right, and he did such an extensive set of tours there, but I feel like there were some Australia performances circa like 95 that were really, really powerful. That particular song. Now we're deep in the weeds about Jeff Buckley. Everybody should listen to some Jeff Buckley.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I know Mike is going to kill us.
Wait, Daphne, can I ask one more thing?
Yeah.
Even if it's just on the way out, can we hear a little bit of, even if it's just while people are filing out, can we hear the Nobody Knows? I love that song so much. I didn't know it was on the clip.
T.L. Barrett.
Yeah,
yes,
can we just play it as exit music so I can enjoy it?
So we've got exit music from T.L. Barrett from the South Side. Very complicated,
deeply complicated man.
Yeah, but the song itself is, I want you. Ooh, it's exegetical. I mean, it uses kind of, R&B recalcitrance to just, drive out the sorrow. So we should go out definitely with T.L. Barrett. Weirdly used on hacks, which I definitely disapprove of. So yes, let's go ahead. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.